Good evening, and welcome to tonight's One Read Author Talk with Charlotte McConaghy. Thank you for being here as we celebrate 23 years of One Read. I have a few housekeeping items before we begin. We're using Zoom's live transcript feature to provide closed captioning this evening. To turn this on or off, click the Show Captions button in the Zoom control bar at the bottom of your window. If prompted, select the language you want to use for this event. Captions will appear above the Controls toolbar. Just as the choice of one read book each year is community-driven, so are tonight's questions. Thank you to everyone who submitted questions for our author in advance. If you have additional questions for the author, please type in your questions using the chat feature of Zoom. Tonight's program is being recorded and will be available on the library's YouTube channel for future viewing and sharing. And now, I'll turn things over to Daniel Boone Regional Library's Associate Director, Erin Magner.
Good evening. My name is Erin Magner. I am the Associate Director of Public Services for the Daniel Boone Regional Library, and I want to welcome you all to tonight's One Read Author Talk. We have had an incredible month of programs throughout Boone and Callaway counties related to this year's book, Migrations by Charlotte McConaghy. We have had difficult and important conversations about mental health, climate change, and species extinction. We've celebrated birds and flight. We appreciate the hundreds of you who have attended events and promoted this book to your book clubs, your coworkers, and your families. Thank you for your support, and we are so pleased that you chose to join us this evening. As we say every year, this program may be called One Read, but its success depends on the work of many. So first, I want to thank the Friends of the Library for their financial support of the program. They provide funding for our author talk and purchase hundreds of copies of the One Read book for us each year. Thank you to our reading panel for dedicating so much time and careful thought to narrowing down the list of nominated titles from more than 250 to just 2 for a public vote. One Read's month-long celebration would not be possible without the work of our task force, made up of community members and organizations in Boone and Callaway counties. We appreciate the support they provide, whether it is financial support, providing event venues, securing speakers and performers, promoting our events, or suggesting great program ideas. A special thanks to KOPN for broadcasting tonight's author talk, as well as Westminster College's Reeves Library and MU's Museum of Art and Archaeology for hosting watch parties tonight. I would also like to thank the many DBRL staff members who have helped plan, support, and host One Read events region-wide, including our One Read co-chairs, Kirk Henley, Catstone Underwood, and Lauren Williams. Thanks, you guys. Finally, I would like to thank former KFRU radio host David Lyle for interviewing our author this evening. We really appreciate Mr. Lyle's decades-long support of our One Read program and the library. So this has been an amazing month, and we are very pleased to cap it off with a virtual visit from this year's One Read author, Charlotte McConaghy. Charlotte is joining us from Australia, where it is already Wednesday morning. So just like her book, Migrations, she is coming to us from the not too distant future. Charlotte has a master's degree in screenwriting from the Australian Film, Television, and Radio School, and a number of published science fiction and fantasy works for young adults in Australia. Her international bestseller, Migrations, is her first foray into adult literary fiction and has been translated into 20 languages. Her second novel and New York Times bestseller, Once There Were Wolves, is a romantic mystery about a biologist charged with reintroducing wolves into the Scottish Highlands. And her newest novel, Wild Dark Shore, is coming in March 2025. We are so pleased that she could share some time with us this evening. Welcome, Charlotte McConaghy. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's really lovely to be here to chat, and such an incredible honor to have Migrations chosen for this year's One Read.
Charlotte, It is nice to meet you this way. I hope you don't mind if I just call you Charlotte. You're free to call me David or Dave, whichever you'd like to. I'm really privileged. It is my honor to be able to do these events for the library. And I want to echo what Aaron said. Kat, Kirk, and Lauren have done just a terrific job of putting programs together again, as they do year after year. I want to get started by asking, I don't know how you found out, whether it was an editor or an agent or someone else said there is a small city in the middle of the United States that wants to read Migrations and do it as a community read, and you might be a part of that month with one special evening. How'd you learn about that, and what was your reaction?
Well, I actually got a lovely email from Kirk, who is your director, and he emailed to just kind of very understated say that it had been selected for the One Read program, and I wasn't actually quite sure what that meant, but I looked into it and was really blown away. I kind of couldn't believe it had made it through such a round of decisions and then was publicly voted. It's just incredible. I'm so pleased.
And then one of the things that I thought of when I was preparing for tonight's conversation, people have asked you about the comparison of Migrations with Stations 11, and that was one of our One Read books from back in 2015. So
Right.
we have that overlap there.
Yeah, lovely. I love that book. It's really an amazing novel. And I was very, very lucky in the early days of my kind of lead up to the release of the novel that Emily actually read the book and provided a really beautiful endorsement for it. So yes, I love her and her novel.
So you wrote the book, it came out 4 years ago, or 2020. When
Mhm.
you are not doing an interview about the book like you are tonight, or you've done many times since the publication of the book, what sticks with you about the book, Migrations?
Oh, that's a good question. I always think about I actually really miss Franny as a character. I think you miss all your characters when you move on from them. I got really, really close to her while I was writing the book. Um, because as was mentioned, I had come from writing these kind of big sci-fi epics with lots of characters, and then all of a sudden I found myself writing something very different with Migrations. I had just, I guess I changed. I was interested in different things. I became passionate about different things, but I suddenly had this character and no escape from her in a sense. There was no way to there was no other characters that I was jumping to. I was just in her head and her heart. And the only way through was to dig deeper into her. And so has stayed with me a lot. And I think of the turns a lot as well, and their beautiful kind of heroic journey that they go on, and the kind of big sweeping flight that they take down the ocean, the Antarctic Ocean. Yeah, and just the feel of that book is what stayed with me, I think.
I find Franny to be someone that's hard to like sometimes. When you were
She
writing her,
polarizes people.
what's that?
She polarizes people for sure.
But then again, there's so much at times where you sense the heart that she has, but also the struggles that she is having just with her own, I guess, call it mental health or whatever it is that you would want to call it. I don't know if you just let that flow from you as you were creating her and living with her, or if you said, I've got some background here of others that have touched my life this way, or I've read about others who have had similar type struggles. How did she evolve?
Yeah, she was a really organic process for me. And she's sort of unlike any other character I've written in that came to me. I felt like she had come to me fully formed, and I was just kind of following her. Um, and I know that sounds really strange, but authors do talk about how their characters kind of make decisions for themselves, and it's sort of unbelievable, but it is true. It does happen strangely, and so I was just trying to stay really true to her sort of struggles and her desires. She's someone that I wish I could be more like, in the sense that she is very good at tapping into the wildness within her in a way that a lot of us are not. I would love to be able to do that better in my own life. She's very brave, but as you say, she's also struggling with, some really difficult things in her life. She's been through a lot of loss, and that's one of the kind of main themes of this novel. It looks at small scale personal loss, but also global scale loss, and how that can kind of interplay. So she's got a lot to carry, and she's also someone who, I think, she struggles to know where she belongs. She searches kind of eternally for home and family, and yeah, that idea of belonging. And maybe that came a little bit from me. I sort of grew up moving around a great deal. I had lived in 21 houses by the time I was 21 years old, just constantly kind of on the move. I certainly have no sense of um, uncertainty around my family. My family are amazing, but I definitely have a sense of being unsure of where my home is or where I belong. And so I was kind of exploring the UK and Ireland and looking into my heritage there, and that's when the first germs of Franny kind of came to me. This woman who sort of, yeah, just couldn't stop roaming.
And we learn so much about her throughout almost all of the book. At the epilogue, when she is released from prison, she gives the line, she exited the prison full to the brim. So that's kind of a transformation, that less time was spent on that than setting up all of the trials and tribulations and grief that she had experienced. Did you breathe easier once that came out? Did you feel that transformation also?
Yes, yes, absolutely. I mean, yeah, we've talked about how she's a really difficult character because she's gone through so much grief and heartache, and not knowing what to do with herself, really. Um, but I think it's really lovely to kind of write from a place of sadness and loss, and write through it into its opposite. So for Franny, that meant uh, letting go of whatever shame she had around who and what she is, being able to embrace who and what she is, finding forgiveness, I suppose, for herself and what she's caused to happen. So redemption in that sense. But ultimately, the most important thing that I found, I talked a lot when the book first came out. I was often asked a lot about hope and the rediscovery of hope in Franny. And at the time, it's interesting. I've kind of reframed what the book means in my mind a little bit in the years that have passed. I used to think it was about discovering hope, and that was kind of the ultimate goal of the novel. But I actually see it a bit differently now. I think it's more about um, finding purpose. That to me is much more meaningful than hope, which I think lets us off the hook. It's very easy to just hope that other people will solve the problem. Much more powerful to say, I am going to change things. I'm going to make sure things are okay. And that's what Franny finds at the end, and it's what fills her up and gives her new life.
Do you think that she does change? Because there were times in the book where I kept thinking, okay, this was going to be a turning point in this young person's life, but it never turned out to be the turning point until at the end. And so now project down the road. Is she living happily ever after someplace?
With her dad in the Scottish wilds. Um, no, I don't think she's, I mean, maybe I'm going to ruin the book for you, but I don't think she does fundamentally change. And I don't think that's the point of the novel. I think it's actually more about her accepting who she is and what she is. And her husband Niall is able to see that in her, and sort of, I suppose, free her, liberate her from this shame around it. He says to her, you never actually leave me. And it's true, she wanders and she roams, and it's not ideal for him, but she doesn't, it's not there's no sense of a lack of commitment from her to their relationship and to him. And I think it's more about her, I guess, being like the birds themselves. For them, flight is life, movement is life, and it's the same thing for Franny. And I don't think that is something that she needs to sort of entirely give up.
One of the persons that's experiencing this conversation says, does Franny remind you of anyone you've known in life? Was she any resemblance to people that you've crossed paths with, or total creation?
What? I mean, she is definitely my creation, but I will say she draws a resemblance to, I have a beautiful cousin who I grew up with, and she took off to Ireland when she was a lot younger and played the fiddle in pubs for many years and swam in the ocean every single day, regardless of how cold it was, and sort of didn't, I guess, yeah, she roamed a lot as well. So, I mean, I say this now and it's obvious that there's a lot of her in Franny. But I guess at the time I wasn't really, maybe wasn't thinking that I was sort of writing my cousin, but I think maybe I definitely used elements for sure.
I saw a comment that you made about yourself. You said, and you can tell me whether this is accurate or not, that you're basically an optimist. You're optimistic with an outlook of life. I'm setting something up here, but is that true?
Yeah, definitely.
So at the same time of saying that, there were times when you were writing that you've also said in previous conversations and interviews that you would write best from a place of deep melancholy. And that at
Yes.
times it got so overwhelming that you'd have to get up and go outside to escape what was weighing so heavily on you. Describe how those two parts of you meshed together in this whole process.
Uh, yeah, that's a really interesting point. I think you know, my creative side is my melancholic side. It's actually where I do my best work from. And so I actually sometimes need to, I try to tap into that. I try to find my way down into that state because it actually provides me with better, I write better, you know, from that state. And I think it's just about tapping into deep feeling, deep emotion. There is, of course, sadness and anger and fear and dread that comes with that. But I'm able to do it because I always know that where I'm trying to get to is the light at the end of the tunnel. It's the opposite of those things, which is where I naturally sit, you know, emotionally. That's where I'm trying to take my damaged characters and provide them with, you know, relief from all of those places. And it's a cathartic experience for me as much as it is for them, and I hope for the readers as well. I think you need both sides.
Did you tell your editor who was doing the interview that aired for Skylark Bookstore a few years ago that on the date of the publication of Migrations, you went outside and tried to see as many animals as you could in Sydney?
Yes, I did. Yeah, I'm really terrible with tech and with social media, but I was meant to be doing like social media posts for my publisher. Um, and so I went roaming and I went to try and find as many birds as I could. It was sort of an experiment. How much wildlife could I find in the city, you know, in the middle of Sydney? And it was such a beautiful day. It was just a gorgeous way to spend my release day. I sat beside a pond and watched geese, and walked past a lighthouse with kind of beautiful darting birds sweeping around my head. And it was so gorgeous. And I got all this footage of it and I was meant to be posting it and I just couldn't make it work. I couldn't do any of the tech. So it was a fail, but it was such a beautiful day anyway.
One of our participants wants to know if the legend of the Selkie had anything to do with the love of water and the oftentimes
Yeah.
trip into the deep of the cold water for Franny.
Yes, definitely. I was raised on the Selkie myth. My favorite movie when I was growing up was a movie called The Secret of Rowan Inish, which was an Irish film. I think it did better outside of Ireland than it did in Ireland, but it made it to Australia, and it's just this gorgeous story about a little girl who whose little baby brother has gone missing on an island, and she goes there and discovers that in fact he's been raised by the Selkies. And I just was really obsessed with the idea of people, women in particular, who could shed their seal skin and walk on land. And even if they were possessed by, by a husband and made to have children, they would always be bound to the ocean. And there is a lot of Franny in that myth. I think there's a moment in the book where it says that she has, her sort of compass leads her not to true north, but to true sea.
Yeah. Someone who sent in a question ahead of time when the library gave him an opportunity said, I can tell you have a tremendous love for nature and animals. What was your starting point when writing Migrations? Were you inspired doing research into Arctic terns, or did they come into the story later on? And associated with that was a question that I had sort of related to that. When, where, and how did the environmental concerns that motivate you, when did they emerge also?
Yeah, okay, so yes, the book was initially the story of Franny following the Arctic terns. I knew I'd been traveling around, I'd been seeing beautiful migratory birds everywhere, and I was kind of, I don't know, just really intrigued by them. And I hadn't been a birder before then. This was totally kind of where the interest sparked. And I looked into lots of different birds, and then found the Arctic tern, which was like, it was just made to be. It was so perfect. I loved it instantly. I loved the courage of its unbelievable flight. This is a bird that travels in its lifespan. I think it's 2.4 million kilometers. I mean, that is just incredible. And it was really interesting. I started to kind of learn about this bird, and I learned about how the scientists that were discovering this flight, and how it wasn't that long ago that there's a scientist from Greenland called Carsten Egervang who discovered that he put the geolocators on the Arctic terns in Greenland and discovered that they actually flew a lot further than we had previously thought, because they weren't flying directly, they were flying in these big, beautiful S patterns to kind of, I suppose, move with the food and the winds. And so that was all really interesting to me. I could kind of see, there was a story that he told about how he and his researchers were on the ice in Greenland, and it was so kind of wild that their tents were being blown into the ocean. And so I used that as, my opening scene for Franny. And so that was always kind of I knew that was the heart of this novel. And it wasn't until I reached about the halfway point, I had written, half the book, and it was just really flat. Something was not working. I couldn't work out what it was. I was very, very stuck. And then I just happened to kind of come across an article which was about the fact that we are actually looking very soon at a reality of having no more animals. Huge, terrifying species loss. And it struck me and it stayed with me. And I knew that was what the book was going to be about from that point on. It totally breathed new life into this story, and it made it mean something for me.
So it would have been a book about the terns and the amazing migration that they make, but it might have not had quite the focus on the environmental concerns and the disappearance of animal species.
That's right. So they wouldn't have been the last of their kind, which I think adds a very different weight to the journey.
You talked also, I think, someplace about how there was something that happened in Australia where at someplace birds returned year after year, but then one year they didn't show up.
That's right, yeah. Seabirds on the coast, you could actually set your watch to go and see them arrive, and people did for many, 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 many years. And then one year they just didn't arrive, and nobody knows what happened to them. But assumed that they just couldn't survive the journey. There's not enough food along the way. We're destroying their kind of resting grounds, which is happening to so many long haul birds. And the sad thing is, I actually wrote this book. When I wrote it, the Arctic tern was totally fine. It wasn't on any lists of anything problematic. And now it's just been named on the list, UK's red list of species in severe danger for extinction. So it's, yeah, heartbreaking.
It's interesting when you read a book like Migrations and you read about the disappearance of perhaps the terns and other animals that you mentioned in the book. I was looking at the Washington Post, and I know I can't hold this up and do a very good visual display here, but in late September, they wrote a book, and the article is called "These Birds Are Almost Extinct. A Radical Idea Could Save Them." And what was interesting about that is because when you wrote about the MER, or whatever you want to call it, the MER, and the debate about whether it is best to allow the animals, or the birds in that case, to continue their migration, or to try to keep them in place so that you knew that they were going to survive. This article wasn't quite like that, but it was an article about relocating animals, and it was talking about a kingfisher that had been found on Guam, but now it wasn't surviving on Guam well. So here we are in Missouri, and next door to us, Kansas, had many of these kingfishers in a container, trying to get them acclimated so that they could be released at a different island. And I thought, this reminds me so much of one of the parts of your book.
Yeah, I mean, oh, that's so sad. But it's also wonderful, the efforts that we're going to try and save these creatures. It gives me a lot of joy to hear that, and that we're making such huge efforts. There are so many people on this planet who are really working very, very hard to save the animals, and yeah, it's a beautiful thing.
Several have referred to your book as kind of a Moby Dick for climate change. What do you think about that comparison?
So I have to admit, I have actually never read Moby Dick. And at the time, I remember the New York Times did their review of the novel when it came out, and the big heading was Moby Dick, Franny's on a Moby Dick quest or something. I can't remember what it was called, but and I sort of thought to myself, you know what, I can never read it now. I cannot ever go near it because it's it's too close of a but I like it. Like it's it's
I think it is a compliment, and the New York Times said it's a clever reimagining of Moby Dick. And then that also said at the end, sea yarns that serve as voyages of self-discovery have been the exclusive literary domain of men for far too long, and you deserve credit for sounding the oceanic depths of the female soul.
I love that. It's so great.
I think it is fun to see it in that light. When you think about the process of writing this book and going through over and over again, when did you know you had it in its final form?
Well, I spoke about how I had to write the first draft, and then I went back. Sorry, I wrote half the first draft, and then I went back with this new kind of world that I had to create. And I will say also, just on that, when I went back, I think it was in a way a kind of gift that I had accidentally written the whole first half without the truth of what it was, because it meant that once I'd figured out that this was going to take place in a very sort of very close future, it meant that I went back, and instead of, I suppose, overbuilding the world, I deliberately didn't change too much about the setting because I didn't want to push it into a kind of futuristic tone and feel. As soon as you go into futuristic, you're letting readers off the hook. They instantly kind of go, okay, I can breathe easy because this is far away. It's not something that I need to concern myself with right now. So even if perhaps, I kind of overlooked some of the more pragmatic concerns or logistical concerns about what would happen to us if there really were no animals. I kind of purposefully did that in order to create a sense of urgency and immediacy. I didn't want to change the world too much because I wanted it to feel frighteningly familiar. So you'd think, this is actually happening right now. And so, yeah, as I say, it worked out really well that I I had to sort of, re-engineer it backwards. And then I wrote to the end quite quickly from that point. I had a lot of energy around it, and got to the end and sort of had an emotional breakdown. It was such an emotional kind of story. And then it went to my agent. She found a home with it, with a publisher. I'm so lucky to be with my editor, Carolyn Blakey. She's at Flatiron. She's wonderful. So we did work on it together at that point, which you always do, it's just part of the process. And she had some bigger kind of structural notes and, some smaller things along the way that made the book much stronger. And then
Did
it
it seem
was,
like,
yeah,
did
ready
it
to
seem
go.
like it was always meant to be written in first person?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, that just felt really intimate to me. That felt like the right place. I needed to really, really bring her to life. And there's a closeness that comes with that, that I think when you're writing and reading. I know it's not everyone's sort of favorite cup of tea, but I really like it. It makes me feel very close to the character. I actually had a lot of trouble figuring out which point of view I was going to write with for my new novel, in a way that normally it's very clear to me how it needs to be, and it definitely was with Franny and with Inti and Once There Were Wolves. But this new book, Wild Dark Shore, has more characters, so I was very unsure of where to kind of go with that and whether I should do third person or multiple first persons, and in the end I kind of did a mix.
It was said in the introduction, and then we've seen this elsewhere referred to the fact that migrations translated into 20 languages.
Mm.
What is the reaction that you get from those who are hearing this in a different language? I didn't phrase that question as clearly as I wanted to,
No,
but
I understand.
you understand what I'm
Yeah,
saying.
it's
We
lovely.
look at it from the English perspective. I'm just curious, not so much the language, but just the setting of other countries reading about this story.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, I only know the reactions of people who reach out to me, which is always kind of a really beautiful thing to hear from people from all over the world. And I think Migrations feels like a global story in a way. So I think it had a lot of appeal, there might even be 30 other countries now who've taken it on. So it had something that appealed to people from all around the world. Um, it is an issue that plagues everyone on this planet, species loss, and a story that spans oceans and continents, and it was always going to have that kind of broader appeal. So it is really, really lovely to hear from people from other countries.
I liked first of all, how do you say the name of the ship? Is it Sagani?
Yeah. Well, that's how I say it.
I like the crew. How did you plot out what, as a writer, we have a lot of people that like to know the writing process. Did you post on some sort of a pin board the different people and then stretch them down into the characters that they became?
Yeah, exactly. So I had a big cork board. I printed out, I like to find actors' faces that I think are going to be sort of embody the character for me. So you just work from the ground up. You work out really basic stuff, names, jobs, where they come from, what their sort of fears and desires are. I put a face to the character. I stick them all up in front of me. I try to think about, I remember I did a lot of work trying to think about how they would interact, where the conflict between them is coming from, what their differing opinions are. You know, you want a small closed setting of a boat to feel rich with not just conflict, but differences of opinions and humor. And I wanted them to feel like they were a family, like they knew each other really well, and sort of for her to just slot in. And it was also really nice for them to have, you know, they needed to be quite different from Franny for there to be enough friction there to make it interesting. So I like to think that she changed them and they changed her.
Whose actor picture did you put up for Ennis?
Oh man, I've got to think back now. I think he might have been a graying around the temples Russell Crowe. Or there was one point where I think he was oh they've changed they all sort of go through different, you know, they morph a little bit. Yeah, I think that was the main one I stuck with.
So I liked the boat scenes the best. I thought that that was
Mhm.
terrific because you were kind of on it was a small, contained, controlled space, but there was so much tension and so much interaction going on there. So how did you write the boat scenes? Did you go out on a fishing boat and spend a month or two with people, or did you have a different way of doing research?
Oh, I wish I could have done that. I get really extreme seasickness. So the thought of boats for me is not fun, but I spent a night on a boat just to try and get a sense of it. I talked to people. My dad spent you know, his youth working on a salmon fishing vessel that was up in Siberia at one point. So that, you know, that was kind of really fun to hear those stories. I watched a lot of Deadliest Catch. I watched a lot of fishing movies and documentaries. Yeah, just lots of reading, lots of trying to kind of imagine what it must feel like to be sort of isolated and stuck with people, and also in a lot of danger. You know, they're very dangerous places to be, and you have to be very well trained to actually set foot on a boat like this, or you're in trouble. You know, they're very easy to get killed on. So that was really, you know, it sounds bad, but that was fun for me to just think of, you know, all the adventure of it, which I also love writing.
I should have asked this when we were talking about the characters and how you develop them. One of the persons who supplied a question early on said, what was the fate of Innes and the rest of the crew on the Sagani? And have you imagined their lives past the pages of the novel?
Uh, no, I have a vague sense of them, that they're okay and that they're doing well. I think Ennis went back to his kids, um, and was able to kind of embrace being a father in a way that he had perhaps run from a little bit in his previous life. You know, they're all facing some pretty major changes in the way they get through life and what they do with their life, and that's true of a lot of trades and skills that become outdated, and or you know that we've valued in the past but that have become harmful, I suppose, to the to our way of life now. So yeah, they're in for some big changes, which I feel for them with. But I think once the book's finished for me, that's it. I don't like to think too far. Otherwise, I feel like I'd be drawn to want to write a sequel, and I just don't want to go down that path. It's
Yeah.
sort of it's finished for me.
So the three books, we've seen people talk about those in the sense of something kind of tying them together. But how do you, after the third book, then say, I want to go this direction that I've not done before? Is that something that's in your mind?
Yeah, very much so at the moment because I'm actually trying to figure out what my next book will be. Um, And you're right, the three novels do feel like they're a trilogy. They're not really a trilogy, but they're a thematic trilogy, I think. They do feel like they go together. And it's the same with Wild Dark Shore, the one that's coming out in 2025. They do feel like they belong together in a sense. And yeah, it's a really tricky question. Now, where do I go from there? I want to do something that's different without being so different I don't connect with it in the same way. So this is obviously something that I'm quite passionate about. I care about the natural world, and it feels like a truthful space for me to be writing in. So I don't want to completely leave that, but at the same time, I feel excited to try new things. I'm a total romantic. I would love to write an epic romance, a big love story. I like the idea of thinking maybe even a bit more sci-fi-ish. I don't know. You've caught me in this total, like, I'm just questioning everything at the moment. I do have an idea. It's very ambitious. It's very big. I think it might be 2 books, and it might be, you know, a huge amount of research. I seem to choose all these things that I know nothing about and need to spend years researching. So I picked another one like that. We'll see. We'll have to just see where I end up.
I respect authors' hesitancy to talk about what those ideas are, so we would all like to be surprised, so I'm not even going to ask you that question.
Yeah, it's
But
too
I am
early.
curious, in earlier drafts of Migrations, did you have anything in there that was, I'll use the term, more preachy about the environment and the climate than what comes across? Because you can read your book and not feel like you're being bombarded with, we should do this to save animals or creatures. We should do this to make the earth a better place to live.
Okay, well, that's good. I think I think it's the same thing I was talking about before. It's actually was a gift that I didn't start out wanting to write about climate change and species loss, because I think I might have approached it differently if that were the case. I might have unconsciously be sort of putting too much um, uh, maybe too much opinion into it. And one of the benefits of having a character who was not a scientist herself meant that she was able to question things. She and Niall were able to have slightly different viewpoints about things and about what needed to happen. Which is always really important. You need an exploration rather than characters that have a fixed point of opinion. I think I liked that about Franny, that she was kind of willing to explore things. You know, she had her own opinions, but she was also open to learning new things from her husband, but also from the fishermen. Having them there was a really great counterpoint as well to this kind of. Otherwise, yeah, you're right. It becomes very, very one note. So I think it is important to show both sides of the issue.
I think she came across understanding the contradictions and the ambiguity of the fishermen who may have not wanted to destroy the supply of fish in the ocean, but it was their livelihood. And
That's
so
right.
there's always that tension of saying, well, I need to do what I felt like I was put on the earth to do, but it's not good for the earth.
Yeah, that's right. And this is the ultimate kind of problem that we're all in now. You know, our way of life is harmful. All of us, the way that we live is harmful. And you know, nobody really wants to hear that. It makes us feel really guilty. It's why it's hard to talk about climate change, because I think there is inherent guilt in the issue because it is our fault. And that's just a really hard thing to swallow. It's hard to swallow that we are going to have to change the way that we live. You know, we have to consume less, we have to buy less. Just everything has to be kind of, I suppose we have to move away from progress and move backwards, which is also a really strange concept for us to wrap our heads around. Um, I think I think the problem is that we're so we're so separate from everything else alive. There's already a really pervasive loneliness to our lives. And I think the problem is we're deeply selfish. It's just the way, it's just our nature. We think of ourselves, we tell stories about ourselves. We value domination of the planet. We value progress for the sake of progress. But the thing is, we're only here because nature is here, because other creatures are here, because plants are here. We come from a huge web of connections. And I think acknowledging that is scary. Makes us feel vulnerable when in fact it makes us strong. And what I wanted to do with this book was just decenter humans and focus on the animals for their own sake, and talk about, look at how it would feel to lose them, you know, not because of what it will do to us and our food supply, but because the loss of these creatures is, you know, terrible in its own right, because they belong here as much as we do. They exist, they're beautiful, miraculous creatures. And I think that by opening ourselves up to seeing them, valuing them, understanding how we can share the planet, it goes a long way in counteracting the disconnect we have and the separation and the loneliness.
Sometimes
So
very
sorry, I just
small,
ranted on for a while there.
sometimes very small things in a book or in some sort of a presentation stick with individuals. Middle of page 177, this stuck with me long after it, but it was just so small, it's not a big deal. We are a plague on the world, my husband often says, Franny speaking. Today there is a huge landmass to our left, and it surprises me because there is no land on the chart I've been studying. As we draw close enough to see, I realize that it's an enormous island of plastic, and there are fish and seabirds and seals dead upon its shore. That was so small, but at the same time spoke to me so heavily about the problems that we're facing, because I don't think that's fiction.
No, it's not.
Pile
There's a
of
lot
plastic
those.
that piles up and becomes its own island.
Yep, that's exactly right. It's very, very scary.
Um,
Those really do exist. And that's definitely something that you know, Niall is a major pessimist, because I think it's kind of amazing to not be a pessimist in the state of the world these days. And but you know, a big theme of the book is that idea that in fact we don't have to be just a cause for destruction. We can be a force for nurturing and growth and healing. And that's what Franny represents. And she actually teaches that to Niall.
this is one of the questions that I was going to ask, and it's also asked by one of our participants tonight. Benedict Cumberbatch and others are teaming up or have teamed up. What's the latest word on an adaptation of Migrations for a movie or some other presentation?
Yeah, it's still in development. So I believe there's a script, there's a director. It's with a studio, Anonymous Pictures, and they're an incredible studio. So I'm really excited and hopeful, but you know, as we know, it takes a long time, and this would be a very expensive movie to make.
Mhm.
You know, it's not a superhero movie, so trying to make something expensive and sort of art housey, I guess, is a hard sell. It's hard to get across the line, but let's all just cross our fingers, because it would be amazing if it actually happened.
Yeah, that would be. And then you can suggest who the actors should be to play all the characters, since
Yeah.
you've already gone through that part. Someone wants to know about the structure of the book, the flashbacks and the two timelines or more that were part of the plan. How did you decide when and how to move back and forth between those?
Oh, that's a good question. You always want to leave one on a bit of a cliffhanger. So I think that was my rule for myself. I always wanted to leave in a good moment, so that you want to come back to it. It's just about creating that. For me, was all about creating tension and building to reveals of information, so that the book felt, I mean, you just want it to be a page turner. You want people to know what's happened, as a basic principle as that. But also it allowed me to, I felt a bit trapped just being on the boat. So it was really, it was great for me to be able to move in space and time and kind of look at Franny's life in the lead up. But yeah, you always do have to make sure you're not just, you can't just jump wherever you want. It has to be at a point where something kind of interesting has happened, or you've left on a big emotional note, so that there is a desire to come back to that timeline.
Somebody has called Franny an unreliable narrator. Were you aware of that, or were there times where you put in something that she was saying or something that she was recalling and you didn't know what she was recalling yet?
No, I always knew exactly what had happened. And yeah, it's a tricky thing being inside someone's head, but also not having them give away too much information. You're trying to hide things from the audience. And I think in order to do that, I had to hide things. I had to have Franny hide things from herself. So for it to be believable, she needed to be in denial about what had happened. And kind of, I think it's her grief and her loss that is causing her to mentally not return, to those places. She's really closed herself off from them, which was the only thing really that allowed me to keep it a secret. But as she sort of unravels and is able to confront the fact that her husband has gone, that's when we can kind of reveal it to the audience.
I probably butchered the name of this, but someone wants to know, have you ever been to Uluru Ayers Rock? Is that close?
Yes, I have. It's
What is that and where
unbelievable.
is that?
Absolutely beautiful. I was actually born in the Northern Territory, which is where Uluru is. And my parents met there. They both kind of in their young years, they did a lot of teaching in Indigenous communities out in, beautiful red center of the earth. And so my dad took my brother and I on a big kind of driving journey around to a lot of the different, he was the principal of 20 different Indigenous schools in their communities out there. So yeah, we visited Uluru, and it's really, really beautiful. It's like a world apart.
Mhm. So you've mentioned this, but someone would like to have a kind of a thumbnail description of what you could tell about your Wild Dark Shore book that's coming out in the spring.
Sure. Okay. So it is, I haven't had to explain it very many times yet. This is quite new for me, but it's the story of a man and his 3 children who are the caretakers of an extremely remote sub-Antarctic island down near Antarctica. You can tell I'm kind of obsessed with that part of the world. It's covered in seals and penguins. It's home to millions of seabirds. It's very wild and untouched. I based this island on Macquarie Island, which is a real island down there. And I went with my partner and my 1-year-old on a crazy boat trip for 2 weeks down to this island. Just unbelievable. You would not believe what you're walking onto. You walk off the boat onto black sand. There are seals and penguins literally at your feet. You can touch them. You don't, but you can. It is truly amazing. So anyway, that's where I've set this new novel. The book, the island was full of researchers, but the Salt family are alone there now because it's become uninhabitable due to rising sea levels and dangerous weather events. And it's during a really bad storm that a woman washes up on shore, and there's a kind of a mystery around who this woman is, and the Salt family nurse her back to life, and they sort of soon realize that she's not telling the whole truth about why she's there, and she soon realizes they're not telling the whole truth about anything. And it's a romantic family mystery. It looks at what it means for us to have children in a dying world. how we talk to them about the dangers of the world, how we teach them to love the things that we're bound to lose.
You have, you said before we turned on the video tonight, I don't know if he's 3 yet, but about a 3-year-old son and then a, 6-month-old daughter. So what do you plan on telling them? That's my first question. The second part of that question is, how in the world do you structure time to write with those 2 children?
Yeah. Well, I haven't managed to structure any time to write since my daughter was born. That will be next year's challenge. So I'm just having some maternity leave at the moment. But I did write Wild Dark Shore after Finn. So he was about 1 when I wrote that one. And as I said, we all went down to this crazy island together. And it was such an amazing adventure. And I love that he's not going to remember it, but he'll be able to look back at the photos and see himself there with the seals and the penguins. And, it's a really kind of amazing experience to have provided him with. And yeah, it's a question that I kind of ask myself a lot, and they're too little right now to talk about that stuff, but we are going to need to have those conversations soon. And I don't want to frighten them, but I also don't want to shield them too much from it, because it is something that they're going to have to learn how to survive. I want to teach them to love the world and to cherish it and to want to save it, but I also don't want to burden them with having to save it, because that's our responsibility. It's just a topic full of difficulties, and that, a lot of this book, I talk about how migrations and Franny came from sorrow and loss. Inti and Once There Were Wolves came from rage. She's this force of fury. And I think this new book comes from a place of fear, which is, it's not, we don't like to think about that, but it is, when you have children, you become very acquainted with fear, fear for them and for the world that we're leaving them. And it is, this book explores whether or not we should be having children and how to have them in a world that we may not be able to keep them safe in.
We appreciate your time, and we're going to need to let you go. I just want to say one thing that people here have responded to, and I know in reviews they have the very first 2 sentences of the book: the animals are dying, soon we will be alone here. But then the very last 2 lines of the book, talking about the clues, which Franny says, I asked the first time, and her dad says, to life, they're hidden everywhere. Such a transformation from the beginning to the end. And you said, I think, to the Tribune reporter who did a story, stories should never end where they begin. That was interesting. Yes. That we moved from they're dying everywhere to life that's hidden everywhere.
Finds a way. Yeah, that's right.
Beautiful way to end, begin and end, I think, taking us to someplace hopeful. Thank you so much for where you've taken us through the migrations and what you've shared with us tonight. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks, David. It was lovely to chat.
Yeah, I just want to add my thanks. Thank you, David. Thank you, Charlotte, for sharing our evening and your morning with us and being so generous and thoughtful with your answers and your time. Our community has spent a fascinating month engaging with your book and thinking about our relationship to birds, our planet, each other, and the wildness that's in all of us. So thank you again, David, for moderating tonight. And thanks to all of you watching online or listening on the radio. Thank you for joining us this evening and celebrating 23 years of One Read. Have a great night, everyone.